Welcome to this YSL tutorial on Report Builder 2016. This part of the series is going to explain the basics of creating your very first report in Report Builder. So this isn't designed as a detailed explanation of every single last step, but it's going to give you a quick overview of how to get from start to finish building a single report from scratch. So we'll begin with a quick checklist of the bits of software you should have installed, then explain how to start with a brand new blank report, which actually won't be that blank after all, so we'll explain how you can work with report items, which are the objects that sit in the report like text boxes and tables, etc. We'll explain how you can create a connection to a data source, which in this case will be a SQL Server database, and then explain how you can create a data set, which is essentially a query that retrieves data from that database. We'll explain a few detailed things about working with tables, including assigning columns from the dataset into the various table columns, how you can apply basic formatting, how you can insert and delete rows and columns, etc. And then finally we'll explain how you can save, close and then reopen reports that you've previously worked on. Okay, now before we begin creating the report, there are a few basic things you'll need to have done first. Hopefully, for obvious reasons, you'll need to have Report Builder installed. If you haven't already done that, fortunately we have a video that explains exactly how to go about doing it, and even better news, it's not even that long a video, it's under 10 minutes long, so it shouldn't take you too long in case you need to follow the steps there to get the application installed. I'm also going to assume that if you want to use the exact same data source I'm going to use for creating the reports in this video, that you have access to a SQL Server. And again, if you don't already have access to one or you haven't installed one on your own machine, we've got an entire series that explains how to do that. So we've got a SQL Server 2016 Getting Started series. Now sadly the videos in this particular playlist are slightly longer, but the good news is you don't have to watch all of them to get up and running. So you'll definitely need to follow part number 1, which is about getting SQL Server installed, and then you'll also need to have access to an application called SQL Server Management Studio in case you want to install a database. You can then skip over all the rest of the information up to part 8, which talks about the YSL Movies database, which is the example database we're going to be using for this particular video. You may well already have these steps performed as part of another series you might have watched on our channel, and if so, great. Otherwise, we have all the information there for you to get up and running as quickly as possible. Okay, so the first step in actually creating a report is to open up the application and create a brand new blank report. So assuming you've got the application installed, you can head to your Start menu, and you may have created a quick shortcut for Report Builder in your Start menu, as I have in the previous video on installing the application. Alternatively, you can find it in the All Programs list. Alternatively, you can search for it, of course. So if I hit search and then type in Report Builder, or start typing in Report Builder, it should pop up fairly quickly. So whichever link you found, just click that to launch the application. It won't take too long, it's not a particularly heavyweight application. And assuming you've got all the default settings applied, this is the screen you should be presented with. So to start with, you get a Getting Started window that tries to help you out by giving you various options for beginning a new report. There are lots of different wizards here that hold you by the hand to help you build tables and charts and maps, etc. Alternatively, you can just choose a blank report and build everything yourself from scratch, which is basically what we're going to do. So you can either click blank report or even just close down the Getting Started window, and as you'll see there's a blank report sitting there in the background. Now just before we start modifying the design of the report, it's probably worthwhile having a quick whirlwind tour of the screen, just so that you're comfortable with where the various elements of the application sit. So you can probably tell already just from looking at the screen that Microsoft have designed it to look as close as possible to a basic standard Office application, something like Excel or Word. So you have a little quick access toolbar at the top left hand corner with basic buttons on it. Then there's a file menu with various save and open options, as you'll see later on. We've got a home tab which lets you format various objects you can select on the report. The insert tab is where you would go to insert new items, as we'll do shortly. Then the view tab lets you turn on and off various different elements of the user interface. So there are several aspects of the user interface that are turned on by default. You've got the report data window on the left hand side, which is where we'll go shortly to create a data source and then write a query to retrieve some data from our database. You can switch that element off if you don't need it, but trust me, you're going to need it a lot. But it's helpful if you need to design very large reports. You can give yourself a little more screen space for designing the report by switching these panels on and off. The grouping panel, which we won't use in this particular video, but it allows you to assign grouping elements to various objects you can design in the report. Again, that can be switched on and off. Then the parameters panel, which again we won't use in this particular video, but you can switch that on and off. The properties window we are going to use in this video. Properties lets you apply some slightly more sophisticated options for various elements of the report, so I'm going to leave that one switched on for the time being, but bear in mind you can switch it off if you need a bit more space. Then of course finally the ruler, which you can turn on and off fairly easily. So I'm teaching you how to check and uncheck a checkbox. That's not meant to be as patronising because it's coming across probably. So let's switch back to the home tab just for the next little section, and then let's have a quick look at some things we can do to the items that are already in the report. Now when you create a blank report in Report Builder, it's not obviously all that blank after all. You can't have failed to notice the big text box sitting at the top of the report that says click to add title, and a slightly smaller text box at the bottom right hand corner that says execution time. That doesn't mean that anybody's going to die during the creation of this report, hopefully. That's just a quick expression that will show the time at which you choose to run the report when the report's running. So you can make basic changes to these objects that are already sitting in the report. So for instance, if you didn't want to show the execution time, you can happily just click into that text box and then just hit the delete key on the keyboard to remove that object entirely. You're then left with a basic blank page footer, which if you wanted to remove entirely, you could right click into and then choose remove page footer. Should you want to bring that one back, you could just right click somewhere in this dark grey area and you could choose to add a page footer. You could right click again and choose to add a page header. So of course these items, or any items that you put into these areas, will appear at the top and the bottom of each page in the entire report. I'm going to switch off both the header and the footer for the time being, again by right clicking into the blank dark grey area and then choosing remove page header, then remove page footer as well. Now of course you don't have to delete the existing report items, you could choose to use them for their intended purpose. So for instance, if you wanted to add a title to the report, exactly as it says, click to add a title. It's quite important you select the text with the vertical I-beam cursor, so rather than the white arrow cursor, the northwest arrow as Microsoft call it, if I click with that cursor it selects the object, which means I can do things like resize it, or I could click and drag to move it around. If I wanted to click to replace the title, then it's important that I click on the actual title text. So if I were to do that, that placeholder text disappears and I can then overtype it with whatever I want. So I could call it something like simple movie report or something along those lines. I'll spell simple with a lowercase I, simple movie report. And then to enter the text, don't press enter. If you press enter, it throws a new line in the text box. So I'm going to press backspace to undo that and then click somewhere away from the text just to enter it. So click into a blank part of the report. Now should I want to apply any formatting changes to the object, I've got a few different choices. If I select the text box itself this time, so if I wanted to apply a fill colour for instance, I'd select the text box using the northwest arrow, this white arrow cursor. Then I could change its background colour either by using the fill colour tool on the home tab of the ribbon, so I could choose a fill colour from the drop down list there, that's fairly hideous. Alternatively, I could use the properties window, so you'll see that if I have the text box selected, the properties window shows me properties of that object. If I clicked onto a different item in the report, then the properties window changes to show me properties of that item. So you can select various different elements to show different properties in the properties window. But if I select my report title, I can change its background colour. It's fairly obvious, this hot pink colour. Click on the drop down arrow, I've got the exact same list of choices. Again, another equally hideous one. Alternatively, I could actually right click onto the text box and I can choose to view its properties. So if I right click with the mouse and then choose text box properties, I should then be able to find a tab on the dialog box. So there's a tab there called fill on the left hand side, and then I've got a fill colour tool which I can click on the drop down arrow of and then choose a slightly different colour. Let's go for something slightly more sober. And if I finally click OK, that will format that selected object. So that's true for pretty much any object in a report. You can either format it using the home tab, the properties window, or by right clicking and choosing to view its properties dialog box. So let's do a couple of other quick simple things. I want to format the text in the text box now, so if I click again using the northwest arrow, the white arrow cursor, to format all of the text I can just change some of the basic font formatting properties here on the home tab. So let's make it bold, and then maybe let's change the font colour as well. So let's make it a sort of dark shade of blue, purplish. I could change the font and the font size of course. If I wanted to format just part of the text independently of the rest, so let's say for instance I want something to happen to the word movie rather than just the entire set of text, you can click and drag inside the text in this fairly standard way to select it, and then any formatting options you apply, like for instance italicize the text, maybe change its colour to something slightly more garish, then that will affect only that selected text. just going to resize that title text box a little bit so I can actually see the bottom of the letters of the P's in there. Okay, so there you go, some basic text and formatting properties. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could draw your own objects in the report. You don't have to stick with the placeholder objects. So what I'm going to do at this point is actually select that object and then hit the delete key. After all that beautiful formatting, sad to see it go, but I'm going to hit the delete key on the keyboard just to remove it. And then instead I'm going to head to the Insert tab in the ribbon and look at some of the items I could choose to insert myself. So the thing that I've just deleted was something called a text box. You see there's a text box tool in the ribbon in the Insert tab. So one way to draw a text box would be to click once on the text box tool and then move the mouse cursor somewhere over the report, and then I can either click and drag or I can click once to drop a text box. So if I do that, I'll get a new text box allowing me to type in some new text. So let's go for the same sort of basic text, simple movie report. I'll try to make this one look a little bit less hideous than the previous one. And again, to enter the text, I can then just click away from it, and then I can select the object and I can reposition it, and I can resize it, and then I can maybe change some formatting properties. So it's all the same standard things with objects that you've drawn yourself compared to objects that were there for you. That's probably a little bit too large. Let's change that down a little bit, and even a little bit more perhaps. There we go, it's getting better now. There we go. I won't go for anything nearly as hideous as what we've just done. Well, I say that I'm so bad at formatting things. Please don't treat this as a good example of good formatting. I'm sure you've got far better ways to do it yourself. Another way to insert a text box, if I wanted to do that myself, would be to right click into the background of the report, and I can choose the Insert option. And the list of options on the Insert menu is the exact same list of options on the Insert tab in the ribbon, apart from one very basic option which we won't talk about in this particular video. I'm going to insert another text box, so I can right click, choose Insert Text Box, and then I can reposition that if I wanted to, and I can then resize it, and I could edit some text inside it. I want to reproduce the execution time expression that I had last time, so there are a couple of different ways to do that, but one simple way would be to right click into the text box and choose the option there called Expression. Now we'll talk about these in a lot more detail as part of the rest of the series, but just for now what I would like to be able to do is insert a preset field or a built-in field. So in the Expression Builder dialog box there's a built-in fields category, and if I select that I'll find there's a specific option there called Execution Time, which if I just double click on will type in a specific expression into the Expression Builder. Then I can click OK, and then that text box shows me now and execution time, so the same as the one that I deleted from the page footer earlier on in the video. So I won't bother formatting that one at this point. I'm just going to click away from those objects, and then we'll look at how to actually connect to a database to get some data. Now at some point, of course, you'll want your report to display some actual data, and the first step in doing that is to create something called a data source. Now a data source is essentially just a connection to a database or some other kind of file which contains the data you want your report to display. You can create a data source using the report data window on the left hand side of the screen. So if I were to right click on the data sources folder and then choose the only available option, add data source, I'll be presented with this data source properties dialog box. I guess the first thing we should do is give this a more sensible descriptive name, so rather than calling this data source 1, I'm going to call this one movies. That's a reference to the movies database we're going to connect to. Now Report Builder allows you to refer to one of two different types of data source or connection as they're named here. You can refer to a shared connection or data source, or you can refer to an embedded connection or data source. You can't actually create a shared connection in Report Builder, you can only refer to one that already exists. And we'll talk about how to do that in a later video. So in this example what we're going to do is refer to an embedded connection. So what that means is that the data source we create will only be available to this single report. It can't be viewed or used externally to that report. But that's fine for this particularly small example. When you've chosen to use an embedded connection, you can then choose what connection type. So there's a variety of different database types you could choose to connect to, but we're going to stick with a basic SQL Server connection type. You then need to build up a connection string, which you can either type in if you know how to do that, and I'm far too lazy and I don't know enough about it to actually type it in by hand. So what I tend to do is use the build button to use another dialog box to build up my connection string. So if you click build, you'll then get a second dialog box that helps you build up the connection string. The first thing to do is either choose or type in a server name. I always find it more successful to type in the server name. I often find that clicking the drop down arrow here takes forever for the list to appear, and it's often empty anyway. So what I'm going to do here is refer to the SQL Server instance that I installed in the earlier video series I pointed out from our YouTube channel. So if I just point you back to SQL Server 2016 Getting Started, that playlist, the first part of that playlist talks about how to install an instance of SQL Server. And in that video, what I did was created an instance called SQL 2016 Training. So to refer to that, I'm going to type in a full stop followed by a backslash, then SQL 2016 Training. What I can then do, assuming I've typed in the instance name correctly, is select a database that's installed in that server. So if I choose the drop down list at the bottom of the dialog box, and I can select my movies database. I can, if it makes me feel better, test the connection. I feel better. I can click OK. I can click OK again. There's my connection string written out for me. It's not actually all that complicated. I can then click OK one more time, and then my data source will be created, and I can now write queries on that data source to retrieve some actual data. The next stage in displaying some data in the report is to create something called a data set. Now, a data set is essentially just a query using one of the data sources that you've created in the report. So we're basically going to write a query on our movies database to retrieve some data. One way to do that is to right-click on the data source you've created. So if I right-click on my movies data source, I can choose to add a data set to it. That will display another dialog box showing me a list of ways that I can retrieve data from my movies database. What I'm going to do first is rename the dataset. So dataset 1 isn't a particularly descriptive name. Let's call it something like movies and directors, giving us a clue about what we're actually going to retrieve. Again, I've got an option to use a shared dataset, although I can't create one at this point on this dialog box. I'm going to talk about shared datasets again in a later video in the series, so for now we'll use an embedded dataset, which is stored just inside this single report. There are various different types of queries you can create. If you know SQL reasonably well, you can just write out a select statement directly into this query text box here. You'll probably find it much easier, however, just at this stage to use something called the Query Designer, which is a little graphical user interface, a little GUI tool to help you build up a query. So I'm going to click the Query Designer button, and what that will allow me to do is see what tables belong to my movies database. So if I expand the tables folder on the left hand side, I'll see a list of all the tables that are sitting in that database. So I've got a table called Film, which contains information about, of course, films or movies if you prefer. If I click the plus symbol to the left of that, I can then check the individual columns that I want to return. So I'd like to return the title column and the release date, and let's say the runtime in minutes, and maybe also the Oscar wins. I said that I'd also like to retrieve some information about the directors. So if I were to look into the director table by clicking the plus symbol to the left of that, I could then choose to include, let's say, the full name column. And I could also choose to view the date of birth, or the DOB column as it's called there. I can do various other basic things with this query designer. For instance, I can run the query just to see that the results look sensible, and that will return a set of results for me. That all looks pretty sensible to me. There's several other things that we can do here that I'm going to talk about in later videos. For now, I'm happy that I've got a nice set of data that I can work with just to display into the report. So if I click OK on this first dialog box, that will show me the query that I've effectively written. And again, I could have written that out from scratch if I'd wanted to. If I finally click OK again, you should see that your dataset appears at the left-hand side with a list of all of the columns you've selected. The next stage in displaying data is to insert some kind of report item that can display this data. So one type of item we're going to use, it sounds quite boring, but it's something called a table. So you can insert tables again from the Insert tab in the ribbon, or if you prefer, you could just right-click somewhere into the report and choose Insert and then choose Table. And that will give you a very basic empty table with 3 columns and a couple of rows, a header row and a data row. Now the idea behind a table is you can pick each column that you've put into your dataset and assign it to an individual column in the table. You can do that in a couple of different ways. So you should notice if I hover the mouse over various cells in the data row, that a little box appears at the right hand side of the cell. If I click onto that little box, this field selector, it allows me to choose from a list of fields that belong to my dataset. So I'm going to choose title for the first one. Now that will insert the word title twice. It will insert title into the data row, embedded in square brackets, and it will also insert title into the header row. So the title in square brackets is a reference to the field, so that retrieves data from that column from the underlying film table. The word title in the header row is just plain text. It's the equivalent of our entire report header, I suppose. So you could modify that if you wanted to, again, by clicking into the text box, and you could say edit the text so it says something like movie title or film title rather than just title, for instance. I could then assign columns again. If I go to the next column, the release date column, if I can select the field selector again and choose release date. One thing I really love about Report Builder and reporting services in general, it's a tiny little thing, but when you insert a column which doesn't have spaces in it, but it uses one of a few different conventions. So I've used a convention here where you capitalize the first letter of each word in a compound word, so release date, capital RD, run time minutes, RTM. So when Report Server or Report Builder recognizes that convention, it puts a space in for you automatically, which I think is just lovely. It's the small things that make the difference, isn't it? So that's one way to assign fields. You can just select from the field selector. You could also, if you prefer, click and drag fields. So if I wanted to position the runtime minutes field into the third column, I can just click and drag from the report data window and then release the mouse button when it reaches the position I want it in. And that's quite a neat way to insert new columns as well. I could insert new columns in a fairly boring, standard, traditional Microsoft Excel kind of way. If I right click into the last column, I could choose to insert a column to the right, and then I could select the next field, which would be Oscar wins in this case. Alternatively, I could just click and drag fields, and I can attach them to the right hand side of the table, or in fact I can insert them anywhere in between two existing columns as well. So you'll see the blue vertical line appears showing you where the object will go. So I add the full name and then the DOB as well, and then I'll just change the title text for full name so that it says director, just so that we know exactly what we're talking about there. Annoyingly, my little convention there has tripped me up. DOB is recognised the capital D and the capital B and then inserted a space, so let's change that as well. So I'm going to call that date of birth, give it a proper full title. Excellent. Okay, so if I just click away from that text box, then there's my basic table created. Now the table itself doesn't look that impressive right at this point. If I told you that the movies database had 1,200 films in it, it's not immediately apparent looking at this basic report designer that that's the case, because we only have a single row of data shown in the table at design time. In order to see all the actual data, what you'd need to do is run the report, and there's a couple of different ways of achieving that. If you head back to the Home tab in the ribbon, there's a Run button on the very first button there, Run. There's also a keyboard shortcut. If I hover the mouse over it, it will say F5, so I could press the F5 key. I could also use this tiny little button in the bottom right hand corner there that says Run. So any of those options will do. If I click the Run button on the Home tab or press F5, my report will run and retrieve all 1,200 rows of data and display those in my table. So when your report is running, you're seeing the live data from the database. I can flick between the different pages using the paging controls at the top, so I can scroll to the different pages, and that's looking definitely more like one single row of data. If I want to get all the way to the very last page, I can just click last and that will take me all the way to the very end. So there's 25 pages worth of films, quite a lot. You may also notice a few things you might want to change. So it's kind of annoying that we've got these sort of double height rows, so that the column isn't wide enough to display the text for each film title. We've also got the release dates and the date of birth in a slightly weird format, showing the time as well, which isn't particularly useful. So let's change a few basic things about the formatting. To make changes, you have to switch back to the design view. So again, you can either hit the design button on the toolbar or press the F8 key. Or you can hit the design button in the bottom right hand corner there as well to switch back to design. Changing column widths isn't particularly difficult. It's just a slightly more manual process that you might be familiar with from something like Excel, for example. So if I click into a cell in the table, I'll see these little grey boxes appear around the top and the left of the table. If I hover the mouse between any two columns, I can then click and drag. You may be familiar with in Excel being able to double click between two columns to change the column widths automatically. Sadly, that doesn't work in Report Builder. You have to do it manually. Once you've made a change, you'll want to run the report again to see what sort of effect it's had. So that's looking a bit better. There's still some slightly longer film names, however, that you might want to increase the width for even more. So again, back to the design view, and then click back into the table, and then make a change, and then run the report again and see what effect it's had. So it's kind of an iterative process when you're designing reports in Report Builder. Make a change, run the report, see if it's worked, and if not, go back and try it again. To format parts of the table, the principle is essentially the same as formatting individual text boxes. So if I wanted to format the release date so that it had a nicer date format, the simplest way I think to do this is to right click onto that text box and then choose to view the text box properties again. The reason I'm viewing text box properties is because the options are much clearer on this dialog box when you want to format numbers. It's very much like the Excel dialog box for formatting numbers. If I select the number page on the left hand side, I'll get a list of different number styles, one of which is date. So if I choose date, I then get a list of specific date formats I could select from. I'm going to go with a fairly basic standard UK date format, where that's day, month, year. So if I select that one from the list and then click OK, I'll want to do the same thing for the date of birth of the directors. So I could do that again either by selecting the text box, right-clicking and choosing text box properties, or I could also use the number tab in the dialog box, so in the home tab in the ribbon. I've got the number option. There's a little dialog box launcher button in the bottom right hand corner there. If I select that, that will take me straight to the number tab of the same dialog box. I could also do the same thing from the properties window. So if I had that text box selected, you'll see that it's shown that I've selected that object at the top of the properties window there, DOB. And then if I could find the appropriate property, I can modify that. So scrolling down a little bit, the property I'm looking for here is called number. So there's the number category, and then there's a format property inside there, which looks as though it gives me a nice drop-down list, but sadly it's a little bit empty. For the format of a number, what I need to do is type in a format. So for instance, if I clicked back onto the release date text box to select it, you'll hopefully be able to see, if I scroll down and find the number property again, that it's entered a specific format for me there. So I could type that sort of thing in manually. And if you're familiar with your Excel date formats, custom date formats, you're welcome to use those same sorts of things. One quick thing to watch out for is that you must use a capital M, an uppercase M for months in Report Builder. I think the simplest way to do this myself is to right click on the text box and choose text box properties, and then just use the appropriate page of the dialog box to perform the formatting, because that's what I'm quickly going to do there. I can also change the background colours and fonts and so on in the same sort of way. If I want to do this to multiple text boxes, the simplest thing to do here is to click on the grey box around the left hand side. I could also click and drag to select multiple text boxes, or just clicking onto a grey box at the left hand side will select the entire header row. What I can then do is format the background colour of that header row, so let's go for a sort of pale bluish colour, and then maybe make the font bold as well, so that makes it look a little bit more like a title. And then if I run the report again and have a quick look at what sort of effect that's had, I might just change the width of the director column so I can see the director names on a single row as well. So going back to the design view, select the director column and then click and drag to change the width of that. One more run just to see. That looks a little bit neater to my eye. I'm no expert, as you can probably tell by now, but yeah, that looks okay to me for the time being. So back to the design view, and then let's have a look at one or two very other basic things we can do. We can do a couple of other quite useful things in this table. One thing that might be useful would be to sort it so that the films appear alphabetically, or by release date, or any combination of those sorts of things. So if I wanted to format or change the sort order of the table, what I'd need to do first is select a cell in the table to expose these grey boxes again around the outside. And then if I right click on any one of those grey boxes, it really doesn't matter which one, I'll get an option there called Tablix Properties. So this is the equivalent of properties as we saw for a text box. I can right click and choose text box properties. For a table, the name is Tablix Properties, which sounds like a bit of a weird word, Tablix. If you may be familiar with this already, but Tablix comes from a portmanteau of three words. It's table, list and matrix, which are three different types of items you can insert into a report, build a report. So Tablix, it's a bit of a weird one, made up Microsoft word, but there you go. So these three types of things are very similar objects, as you'll see a bit later on in the series. Anyway, that bit aside, if I right click and choose to view Tablix Properties, you'll see that on the page, on the dialog box, there's a page called Sorting. So if I select the sorting page, I can then choose to add a sort order. So I'll click add at the top, and then I want to sort by the title first, and that'll be alphabetically listed, A to Z. Then if I click the add button again, there are several films in the database that appear more than once, so I'd like to see the most recent version of that film at the top of the list. So if I choose release date, and then change the order so it's Z to A, so it'll go in reverse order of date. If I then select OK and then preview the report yet again back on the home page and then home tab and then choose run, I'll see that now my reports are listed, or my films are listed alphabetically. So you should be able to see if I scroll down not too far, hopefully there's a film called Anastasia, or sorry, no, Anna Karenina, that's the one I was looking for. That's appeared multiple times, but it is in reverse order of date, so the most recent one at the top of the list. Okay, so there's some basic sorting you can apply to the table. You can also apply basic filtering as well, so perhaps I only want to see the really successful films in my list, rather than seeing the films that haven't won any Oscars. I want to filter those ones out. So back into the design view, I can again select any cell in the table, and then right click onto one of the grey boxes and choose Tab List Properties. Then this time I'll head to the Filters page, and I'll add a filter by clicking the Add button. I'll choose the column I want to apply my filter to, which will be Oscar wins, and I want to make sure that this is greater than or equal to 1, so I can type in the value 1 into that box there. If I then click OK and then run the report again, I should be able to see now that I'm not seeing any rubbish films. Well, according to the criteria of having won at least one Oscar, there is all films have at least one Oscar now in this list. So that should have reduced the number of pages I'm seeing. If I jump straight to the last page, I've now only got 6 pages rather than 25. Now there are a couple of other quite basic things you can do to this table. First of all, let's say I wanted a title for the entire table that spanned the entire list of columns. If I click somewhere into the table and select a single cell, just to expose these grey boxes around the outside, I can right click at the left hand side of the current header row and then choose Insert Row above. And unsurprisingly, that inserts a new blank row. It's got the same formatting as the row immediately below it. What I want to do here is merge all of these cells into one single giant title cell. So to do that, I can either click and drag across all the cells, or I could have clicked into a single cell and hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and click onto the last cell. And then with all those cells selected, I can right click and choose Merge Cells. So that now becomes one giant single cell. Let's just change the name of the table so it's List of Oscar Winners. And then I might want to change the formatting of that cell so it stands out a little bit more. So let's change the fill colour so it's a slightly darker shade of blue, a sort of bluey purple effect. And then maybe I want to change the font colour as well so the font stands out a little more. Maybe make it a little larger as well. I might want to increase the height of the row at that point. You sort of get the idea, I'm sure. And you can give that a quick test, just to have a quick look at what that looks like. That's alright, I suppose, based on my limited artistic skills. It might also be nice to have a footer which shows some aggregate information. So for instance, the total number of Oscars won, or the total runtime in minutes of all the films. In order to do that, again, I need to insert a new row, but this time it's going to be at the bottom of the table. So again, click somewhere inside the existing table, and then right-click on the current bottom row, then choose Insert Row. Now this time I get a few more options, and that's purely because of the type of row that I've just right-clicked on. I don't know if you can see here, this grey box contains 3 horizontal lines, indicating that this is a detail row. If I were to right click on that and choose Insert Row, I've got to make a choice about whether I want my new row to be inside the group or outside the group being the details. So if I were to insert a new row inside the group, let me just show you what happens if I do that. I'll get another row that has these 3 horizontal lines on it, and if I were to run the report at that point, I'll get that new blank row sitting below every single individual film, which definitely isn't what I want. So if I go back to the design view, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click onto that new row and choose to delete it. So instead I'm going to right click onto that grey box again and choose Insert Row, Outside Group below. So you'll see that this time the new row comes in and it's got a blank grey square next to it. If I were to run the report, you'll see each film isn't separated by a blank row, but right at the end of the very last page I get a new blank row sitting there. So having done that, back to the design view. If I wanted to find the total Oscar wins or the sum of Oscar wins, the simplest thing to do is select from the new field selector on that blank row the same field, Oscar wins. And because that's a numeric field or a numeric column, it automatically assigns a sum to it. I'm not stuck with the sum, by the way. I'm going to use sum for this particular example, but if I wanted to say the average or the min or the max, for instance, I could click onto the text that's been inserted for me and then right click onto that highlighted text and choose Summarize By, and then simply choose one of the other options from the list. But I'm going to stick with sum for this particular example, so I'll just turn that off at that point, so I can right click and choose Summarize By and then choose Sum again to reapply it. Same for runtime in minutes. I can click on the field selector and choose runtime in minutes, And I might want to show, maybe it'd be worthwhile maybe adding a quick little title at the left hand side here, just so that it says something like totals. So let's type in a little title manually, totals, and then I can change the formatting of that cell. Let's just use the colours that are currently already selected for me, and then maybe just make that row a slightly lighter shade of blue. So hopefully that won't look too shabby. It won't look brilliant, but then my reports never do. So once I've done all that, I can run the report, and then if I navigate to the very last page, I ought to find my totals are sitting there, and the total number of Oscars, total runtime in minutes. Now that we've done all this hard work, it would probably make sense to save it at some point so that you don't lose anything should something go wrong. So what we're going to do in this video is just save the report to a local location on your machine. The next video is going to explain how you can save this report to a report server so that other people can view it. So to save it locally is incredibly simple. You can either press Ctrl and S, or you can hit the Save button, or you can hit the File menu and choose Save or Save As. It's all the standard sort of things you do for saving any kind of Microsoft Office file. So if I choose Save, as I've got that menu open, I'm going to point mine to my desktop at this point, and then I can simply save this as something like Simple Movie Report. You'll notice that the extension there says reports.rdl. So RDL stands for Report Definition Language, which is essentially what the report is designed in. So as you're designing your report, in the background, some RDL code is being written out for you that defines the design of the report. So I'll call it Simple Movie Report and then just save it, and it will be renamed at the top, which is perfect. If I were to then just close down this entire application, we ought to find, if I just minimize this window, you see that I've got my Simple Movie Report sitting there on the desktop. Opening the file again, pretty straightforward. If I open up Report Builder, it won't be too much of a surprise, I'm sure. I open up Report Builder from scratch. I can either choose to open a previously saved report or go to the recent list, even more usefully. So the recent list shows you where any reports you've recently worked on, just the one for me. You can choose to open it and then browse for it, of course, and it's just like opening up a file in any other application. So I double click on that file or choose it, click on it once and click open. It will reopen it into design view so that I can make further changes. Okay, so those are the absolute basics that you will need to know in order to create any kind of simple report in Report Builder. Obviously there are many more things to learn, lots of extra properties and lots of extra types of items we could insert into the report, and we're going to cover all of those at later stages of this series, but for now we're going to leave it right there. The next video is going to talk about how you can save this report rather than to a local location, to a report server, which means that other people with access to that report server will be able to view it as well. So hope you'll join us for that one. Thanks for watching, see you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.